The neural interface crackled with static as Cathara Voss disconnected from the galactic commerce network, her cybernetic implants cooling against her temple. 3 million credits. The number burned in her visual cortex like a brand. 3 million credits to marry a human. She'd heard the stories whispered in the underground markets of Nexus. Prime desperate human merchants offering fortunes for arranged marriages with non-human species, exploiting ancient loopholes in Terran inheritance law. What she hadn't expected was the holographic projection, materializing in her cramped apartment on the station's outer ring. Miss Voss, the projection spoke with a melodious accent she couldn't place. My name is Aurelius Kane. I represent the Kane industrial dynasty. Cathora's violet eyes narrowed. Even a scavenger like her knew that name. The Kanes controlled 17% of humanity's industrial output, their influence stretching across 47 star systems. I'm not interested in whatever scheme. 3 million credits. Aurelius interrupted, his holographic form flickering slightly. Plus, full citizenship in the Terran Confederacy. All you need to do is marry my son. The Shivari woman's arms crossed defensively, her chitinous plates shifting color from deep purple to wary amber. What's the catch? My son Cassian is ... difficult. He's brilliant, perhaps the most gifted engineer of his generation, but he refuses all social obligations. His 25th birthday approaches, and according to our family charter, he must be married to inherit his position as heir. Cathora's enhanced hearing caught the subtle stress in Aurelius's voice. And you chose a Shivari because you're already considered legally dead by most governments. Your ship was listed as destroyed in the Kepler Nebula incident. 3 years ago, the marriage would be legitimate, but temporary. After the inheritance is secured, you can disappear with your payment, no questions asked. She stared at the hologram, her mind racing through the possibilities. 3 million credits could buy her a new identity, a ship, maybe even a small colony world on the rim, all for playing wife to some spoiled human aristocrat. For a few months. Where is this son of yours? Currently locked in his laboratory aboard the research vessel Prometheus, refusing to see anyone. He's been working on some project for the past 6 months. I haven't spoken to him in over a year. The desperation in Aurelius's voice sealed the deal. Cathara had survived by reading people, and this human was terrified of losing control of his empire. I want half up front. Done. And I want to meet him first. No marriage to a corpse or a madman. Aurelius hesitated. He's not receptive to visitors. Then you better hope he's receptive to wives. 2 days later, Cathara found herself aboard a luxury transport heading toward the outer research stations. The advance payment sat in her accounts like a warm weight. 1.5 million credits, more money than she'd seen in her entire life. She'd already started making plans, a new ship, maybe a courser class with modified engines, and enough supplies to disappear into the unknown regions. The transport docked with the Prometheus with barely a whisper. The research vessel was massive, its hull bristling with sensor arrays and experimental equipment. As Cathara stepped aboard, she felt the subtle hum of advanced technology in the walls, the air recyclers, even the deck plating beneath her feet. Master Kane hasn't left Laboratory 7 in 3 days, the ship's AI informed her in crisp, professional tones. He's ordered all meals to be left outside the door. What's he working on? Classified. Cathara made her way through the pristine corridors, her boots echoing in the sterile environment. She'd expected luxury crystal chandeliers and gold-plated fixtures, but the Prometheus was purely functional, designed for work rather than comfort. She found Laboratory 7 at the ship's heart. Its reinforced door sealed with both electronic locks and what appeared to be welded metal patches. The corridor outside was littered with meal trays. Most untouched, Cathara raised one of her 4 hands and knocked. Silence. She knocked again, harder. Go away. The voice from within was raw, exhausted, tinged with an accent she couldn't identify. I told you people, I'm not interested in your social calls, or your marriage proposals, or your, I'm not people, Kithara called back. I'm your fiancé. The silence that followed stretched for nearly a full minute. Kithara could hear the faint hum of machinery from within the laboratory, punctuated by what sounded like someone moving around equipment. That's impossible, came the voice finally, closer to the door now. My father wouldn't dare. He knows I'd rather die than submit to his manipulations. Yet here I am, Kithara replied, settling into a comfortable crouch. Her Shivari physiology allowed her to maintain the position for hours, if necessary. Kithara Voss, apparently your bride-to-be, though, I have to say, your courting technique needs work. Another long pause. She heard the soft whisper of electronic locks disengaging, followed by the sharp clang of metal bolts being drawn back. The door cracked open, revealing a slice of laboratory beyond and a single human eye, startlingly green and bloodshot from exhaustion. You're Shivari, he said, and it wasn't a question. Observant, you must be the genius son. The door opened, wider, revealing Cassian Kane in full. He was tall for a human, probably just over 6 feet, with dark hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it for days. His clothes, a simple work shirt and pants, were wrinkled and stained with what looked like lubricants and coolants, but it was his eyes that caught her attention, intelligent, wary, and utterly exhausted. How much is he paying you? Cassian asked, without preamble. 3 million credits. He laughed, but there was no humor in it, that's all. I would have thought my matrimonial value was at least 5 million. Don't sell yourself short. I haven't seen the rest of the package yet. That earned her a sharp look, but she caught the hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone more, desperate. Most people who take my father's money are usually running from something. Kithara's chitinous plates shifted to a deeper purple. What makes you think I'm not? Because you're here talking to me, instead of demanding I sign the marriage contract immediately. He stepped back, gesturing for her to enter the laboratory. Besides, anyone truly desperate would have taken the 5 million. There was no 5 million offer. There will be. My father's probably calculating the revised bribe right now. The laboratory was a marvel of organized chaos. Workbenches lined the walls, covered with components she didn't recognize. Holographic displays showed complex schematics that seemed to shift and evolve, even as she watched. At the center of the room stood something that made her breath catch. Humanoid figure roughly 8 feet tall, its surface a mixture of organic curves and mechanical precision. What is that? She asked, moving closer. The reason I can't leave this lab, Cassian said, his voice suddenly serious, and possibly the reason we're all going to die. The figure was beautiful in an unsettling way. Its face was almost human, but the proportions were subtly wrong. Eyes too large, cheekbones too sharp, skin that seemed to shift between flesh and something else entirely. It's a void touched, Kithara whispered, recognizing the telltale signs from intelligence reports she'd seen during her military service. But that's impossible. They're extinct. Not extinct, Cassian corrected, moving to a console beside the figure. Sleeping. For the past 3,000 years, they've been sleeping in the deep void between galaxies, until 6 months ago, when our deep space monitoring stations detected something. He activated a holographic display showing a star map. A red line traced a path from beyond the galactic rim, moving steadily toward inhabited space. They're coming back, he continued. A fleet of them, maybe thousands of ships. They'll reach the outer colonies in 18 months. Kithara felt her plates shift to combat amber. How do you know this? Because I've been talking to one of them. He gestured to the figure, and, as if responding to his movement, its eyes opened. They were completely black, like looking into the void itself, and when it spoke, its voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. The inheritor returns, it said, its gaze fixing on Kithara. The Chevalier remembers. Cassian's face went pale. It's never spoken to anyone else before. What does it mean? The Chevalier remembers. I don't know, Cassian admitted. But 3 days ago, it started asking about you specifically. It knew your name, your ship's registry, even your military service record. That's when I realized, what? That my father didn't choose you randomly. Somehow, he knew you were connected to this. The void-touched figure tilted its head, studying Kythera with those impossible black eyes. The genetic memory carries forward. The old alliance stirs. Alliance. Kythera's voice was barely a whisper. The Chevalier were the only species to resist the first void-touched incursion, Cassian explained, his fingers dancing over the console. According to the historical records I've been able to piece together, your people fought them to a standstill 3,000 years ago. But at a cost, your entire civilization was nearly destroyed. That's impossible. Chevalier history only goes back 2,000 years. Because something made you forget, the void-touched said, its voice like wind through a graveyard. Something necessary, but the blood remembers. The blood always remembers. Kythera felt something stirring in the back of her mind, like a door being opened in a room she'd never known existed. Images flashed through her consciousness, vast ships moving through space, battles fought among the stars, and something else. A face, human but not human, eyes that held the depth of centuries. I need to sit down, she said, her legs suddenly unsteady. Cassian caught her arm, his touch surprisingly gentle. It's a lot to process. I've been living with this knowledge for 6 months, and I still don't fully understand it. Why are you telling me this? Why not just sign the marriage contract and let me disappear with my money? He was quiet for a long moment, his green eyes studying her face. Because I think you're the key to stopping them, and because ... He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. Because in the past 3 days, you're the first person I've wanted to talk to in over a year. The admission hung in the air between them, vulnerable and honest. Kythera looked at this human, this strange, brilliant, damaged human, and felt something shift inside her chest. So, she said finally, about this marriage contract. The marriage ceremony took place in the Prometheus's main conference room, officiated by the ship's AI, and witnessed by 2 Shva droids. Kythera had expected something grander after all. She was marrying into one of humanity's most powerful dynasties, but Cassian had insisted on simplicity. Legal requirement, he'd said with a wry smile. Nothing more. But as they stood before the holographic display, showing the legal documents, Kythera found herself studying his face. 3 days of regular meals and proper sleep had transformed him from the haggard figure she'd first met. His green eyes were clearer now, more focused, and when he spoke their vows, there was something in his voice that made her chest tighten. I, Cassian, Kane, take you, Kythera Voss, as my wife, in the eyes of the law and the Terran Confederacy. I, Kythera Voss, take you, Cassian Kane, as my husband in the eyes of the law and the Terran Confederacy. The AI pronounced them married, with characteristic efficiency, and just like that, Kythera was one of the wealthiest women in human space. The remaining 1.5 million credits appeared in her account, with a soft chime from her neural interface. But the money felt different. Now, less like freedom and more like ... responsibility. So, Cassian said as the servo droids filed out, how does it feel to be Mrs. Kane? Temporary Mrs. Kane, she corrected, though the words felt strange on her tongue. Of course, temporary. They returned to Laboratory 7, where the void-touched figure waited in its alcove. Over the past 3 days, it had begun to speak more freely, though its words often seemed to carry meanings beyond their surface interpretation. The bond is forged, it said as they entered. The old patterns reassert themselves. What old patterns? Kythera asked, settling into the chair Cassian had brought for her. Instead of answering directly, the figure gestured, and the air around them shimmered. Suddenly, they were standing in what appeared to be a vast hall, its walls covered in murals that seemed to move and shift in the light. Holographic projection, Cassian explained quietly. It's been showing me fragments of void-touched history. The murals depicted scenes of incredible beauty and terrible violence. Ships that looked like living creatures moving through space. Worlds covered in crystalline structures that pulsed with their own light. And always, in the center of it all, figures that looked like the being before them. We were the gardeners, the void-touched said, its voice echoing in the artificial space. We tended the galaxy, shaped worlds, guided the evolution of lesser species. For millions of years, we maintained the balance, until Cathera prompted, until we encountered something we could not shape. Something that resisted our touch and thrived in spite of our efforts to guide it. New images appeared, smaller figures, clearly humanoid, but with the distinctive chitinous plates and 4 arms of your ancestors, the void-touched continued. They were young, barely out of their stellar cradle, but they possessed something we had never encountered before. What? Chaos. Beautiful, terrible chaos. Where we imposed order, they created disorder. Where we built perfection, they introduced flaws that somehow made things stronger. They were everything we were not. Cassian leaned forward, fascinated. That's why the war started, because the Chevry were different. Not war, love. The word hung in the air, like a physical thing. Cathera felt her plates shift color, involuntarily, cycling through shades she'd never displayed before. Love, she repeated. We fell in love with your chaos, and you fell in love with our order. For 1,000 years, we worked together, creating wonders that neither species could have achieved alone. The murals showed new images, vast cities that seemed to grow like living things. Ships that were part machine and part organism, art that existed in dimensions beyond the merely physical. Then, what happened? Cassian asked. The void-touched was quiet for a long moment. When it spoke again, its voice carried the weight of ages. We tried to become more like you, and you tried to become more like us. In doing so, we both lost what made us unique. The partnership that had created such beauty became a source of destruction. The images around them shifted, showing scenes of devastation. Worlds cracked open like eggs, stars going dark, entire sectors of space twisted into unrecognizable shapes. The war that followed nearly destroyed both our species. In the end, we chose exile, asleep beyond the galaxy's edge, while your people chose to forget. Your genetic memory was sealed, your history rewritten. It was the only way to prevent the cycle from beginning again. But now you're coming back, Cathera said, because something new has entered the galaxy. Something that threatens to destroy everything we once protected. The holographic environment shifted again, showing star charts that Cathara recognized from recent intelligence reports. Ships, but not ships like anything she'd ever seen. They moved through space like living things, leaving trails of darkness behind them. The Devourers, Cassian breathed. I've seen fragments of the deep space monitoring data. They're not just conquering worlds, they're unmaking them. They consume reality itself, the void-touched confirmed. They are antithesis to both order and chaos, existence and void. Left unchecked, they will reduce the galaxy to nothing. And you think we can stop them? Cathara asked, the Chivalry and the void-touched, working together again. Not we, the figure said, its black eyes focusing on her and Cassian. You, both of you. The genetic memory stirs in your blood, Cathera Voss, and you, Cassian Kane, carry something we have never seen in a human before. What? The ability to bridge the gap between order and chaos. To be both without losing yourself to either. Cathara looked at Cassian, seeing him as if for the first time. That's why your father chose me, isn't it? It wasn't random. He knew. My father doesn't know anything about this, Cassian said, but his voice was uncertain. Your father, the void-touched said, is not who you think he is. The holographic environment dissolved, returning them to the laboratory. But now Cathara could see things she'd missed before, subtle symbols carved into the walls. Equipment that was too advanced for current human technology, and most telling of all, the way Cassian moved around the lab as if he'd been born to it. How long have you been able to communicate with void-touch technology? She asked. Always, he admitted. I thought everyone could do it. It wasn't until I left home for university that I realized it was unusual, and your father never asked about it. Cassian paused, his face cycling through several expressions. He always said it was because I was gifted, that the Kane family had always produced exceptional engineers. The Kane family, the void-touched said, has been preparing for this moment for 3,000 years. The implications hit Cathara like a physical blow. Your father isn't just a human industrialist. He's been working with the void-touched all along. That's impossible, Cassian said, but his voice lacked conviction. Is it? How else would he know to choose me? How else would he have access to void-touch technology? How else would he have known exactly when to arrange our marriage? As if summoned by their conversation, Cassian's communication console chimed, with an incoming transmission. The holographic projector activated, and Aurelius Kane's familiar figure materialized in the lab. But this time, Cathara could see what she'd missed before. The two perfect proportions, the eyes that held depths no human gaze should contain, the way his image seemed to flicker between human and something else entirely. Hello, my children, Aurelius said, and his voice carried harmonics that resonated in her bones. I believe it's time we talked. The holographic image of Aurelius Kane flickered, and for a moment, Cathara saw his true form, tall, ethereal, with the unmistakable features of a void. Then the disguise reasserted itself, leaving only the familiar human businessman. You're one of them, Cassian said, his voice barely above a whisper. All these years, my own father, not your father, Aurelius corrected gently. Your guardian, your guide, your protector. Then, who is my father? The question hung in the air like a blade. Aurelius looked at the void-touched figure in the alcove, and something passed between them, communication beyond words. Show him, Aurelius said. The laboratory filled with soft light, and new holographic images began to form. Cathara saw a world she didn't recognize, beautiful, with crystalline cities that seemed to grow from the landscape itself. In the center of one of these cities stood a building that was part palace, part laboratory, part garden. This was Nexus Tertius, Aurelius explained, one of the last collaborative worlds, where our species worked together during the Golden Age. It was here that the most ambitious project was attempted. The images shifted, showing the interior of the building, a vast chamber filled with both void-touched and Shivari scientists. Two figures stood at the center of void-touched, male, and a Shivari female. Their hands joined over a complex geometric pattern that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions. A hybrid, Cathara breathed, recognizing the ritual from genetic memories that were suddenly flooding back. You tried to create a hybrid. Not tried, Aurelius said. Succeeded, after a fashion. The Shivari female in the image turned, and Cathara gasped. The face was her own, but older, marked with the ceremonial scars of a high-ranking scientist. Leary Voss, the void-touched in the alcove said, your ancestor, my bondmate. The hybrid was successful, Aurelius continued, but the war began before we could understand what we had created. When the decision was made to separate our species, the child was hidden, its nature suppressed, its genetics scattered among human bloodlines. Cassian was staring at the images with a mixture of horror and fascination. You're saying I'm descended from both species? You are the descendant of their love, Aurelius said simply. And you, Cathara, carry the genetic memory of that same love. Together, you represent something that has not existed for 3,000 years, the bridge between order and chaos. But why now? Cathara asked. Why reveal this now? The images shifted again, showing the approaching fleet of devourer ships. But now she could see them more clearly, vessels that seemed to eat light itself, leaving wounds in space that didn't heal. Because the devourers are not a natural phenomenon, Aurelius explained. They are what remains of the worlds we failed to save during the First War. When our conflict reached its peak, entire systems were caught between order and chaos, unable to exist in either state. They became something else, a hunger that consumes reality itself. And now they're coming here, Cassian said. They follow the resonance of our old conflict. Every world where Voitouched and Shivari once worked together is a beacon to them. Earth, with its hybrid bloodlines, shines brightest of all. Cathara felt pieces clicking into place in her mind. That's why you've been hiding among humans for 3,000 years. You've been preparing for this. We've been trying to, Aurelius admitted. But we cannot face them as we are. The Void-Touched alone are too ordered. We cannot adapt quickly enough to their chaos. The Shivari alone are too chaotic. They cannot maintain the focus needed for a sustained campaign. But together, Cassian said slowly, together, you might be able to do what neither species could accomplish alone. Not by becoming more like each other, as we did before, but by remaining yourselves while working in harmony. The Void-Touched in the alcove stirred. The first test approaches. The advanced scouts have reached the outer rim. As if responding to its words, alarms began sounding throughout the ship. The laboratory's main display activated, showing a view of space around the Prometheus. In the distance, something was moving, a dark shape that seemed to bend light around itself. They've found us, Aurelius said, his holographic form beginning to destabilize. The interference is too strong. I can't maintain the connection. Wait, Cassian called out. How are we supposed to fight them? The same way your ancestors did, Aurelius replied, his image flickering. Not by opposing them, but by showing them another way. The transmission cut out, leaving them alone with the Void-Touched figure and the approaching darkness. What did he mean? Cathara asked. But the figure was already moving, its form shifting, as it stepped down from the alcove. The devourers were once like us, it said, its voice taking on new harmonics. Beings caught between states, unable to exist in either order or chaos. They chose hunger over harmony, consumption over creation. But the choice can be made again. You're talking about converting them. I'm talking about showing them what they could be instead of what they are. The ship shuddered as something impacted the hull. Through the laboratory's viewports, Cathara could see the approaching vessel more clearly now. It was 10 times the size of the Prometheus, and its surface writhed with patterns that hurt to look at directly. The ship's weapons won't work against it, Cassian said, his fingers flying over the control consoles. It's not entirely in our reality. Then we don't fight it, Cathara said, surprised by her own certainty. We talk to it. Talk to it. It's a devourer. It's a lost child, the Void-Touched corrected. And you two are the only ones who can speak its language. Cathara looked at Cassian, seeing the fear in his eyes, but also something else, determination. You said I was the key to stopping them. What did you mean? Not stopping, he said quietly. Saving. The Prometheus shuddered again, more violently this time. Warning lights flashed throughout the laboratory as systems began to fail. But instead of panic, Cathara felt a strange calm descending over her. All right, she said, moving to stand beside Cassian at the main console. How do we save a creature that consumes reality? The same way we saved each other, he replied, and when she looked at him questioningly, he smiled. We show it what love looks like. As the Devourer ship drew closer, its dark tendrils reaching out to engulf the Prometheus, Cathara felt something stir in her genetic memory. Not just knowledge, but emotion. The love between her ancestor and the Void-Touched scientist. Preserved across millennia, waiting for this moment. She reached out and took Cassian's hand. The moment their fingers touched, the laboratory filled with light, not the harsh illumination of technology, but something softer, warmer, the light of possibility. Together, she said. Together, he agreed, and as the devourer ship engulfed them, they reached out not with weapons, but with the most powerful force in the universe, the connection between two beings who had chosen to see beyond their differences to the love that united them. The moment the devourer's ship's tendrils touched the Prometheus, reality shifted. Cathara felt herself stretched across dimensions, her consciousness expanding beyond the confines of her physical form. Beside her, Cassian's presence burned like a star, his hybrid nature allowing him to navigate the fractured space between existence and void. The laboratory dissolved around them, replaced by something that wasn't quite darkness and wasn't quite light. Here, in the space between realities, the devourer waited. It was nothing like what Cathara had expected, where she had imagined a monster. She found instead a creature of heartbreaking beauty, a being that existed in constant flux, its form shifting between states of matter and energy. But there was pain in its every movement, a deep ache that resonated through the dimensional barrier. Hungry, it spoke, but not in words. The communication was pure emotion, transmitted directly into their minds. Always hungry, cannot stop, cannot rest, cannot be. It's starving, Cassian said, his voice echoing strangely in the non-space. But not for matter or energy. For completeness, Cathara realized. It's trying to fill a void that can't be filled by consumption. The void-touched figure materialized beside them, its form more solid here than it had been in normal space. This one was caught in the dimensional storms when our war reached its peak. For 3,000 years, it has existed between states, unable to choose order or chaos, unable to die, unable to truly live. Pain, the devourer communicated. Endless. Pain need to stop, need to end. We know, Cathara said, projecting her thoughts toward the suffering creature. We understand. But as she reached out with her consciousness, she felt the devourer recoil. Its pain was too great, its hunger too desperate. It saw her offer of connection, not as salvation, but as another source of potential nourishment. Will consume you too, it warned. Cannot help it. Is what I am. No, Cassian said firmly. It's what you've become, but you can choose to be something else. He extended his own consciousness toward the devourer, and Cathara felt the complex interplay of his hybrid nature. The order of the void-touched and the chaos of the Shivari held in perfect balance. To her surprise, the devourer didn't flee from his touch. You are like me, it said wonderingly. Between, neither, both. Yes, Cassian replied, but I chose harmony over hunger. I chose to be whole rather than empty. How? Cathara asked, understanding suddenly what needed to happen. How? Do we show it the choice? The void-touched gestured, and suddenly, the space around them filled with images, memories, pulled from the genetic archives of both their species. The golden age of cooperation, when void-touched and Shivari had worked together to create wonders beyond imagination. But it wasn't the grand achievements that caught the devourer's attention. It was the small moments, two scientists of different species sharing a meal. A void-touched teaching a Shivari child to manipulate crystalline structures. A Shivari showing a void-touched how to improvise music from the harmonics of stellar radiation. Love, the devourer said, and for the first time, its mental voice carried something other than pain. You loved each other. Yes, Cathara said. Even when we were different. Even when we didn't understand each other. Even when we fought. Love isn't consumption, Cassian added. It's creation. It's choosing to build something together that neither of you could build alone. The devourer's form began to shift, its chaotic fluctuations slowing, becoming more stable. I remember, before the hunger, before the pain, we were, you were, explorers, the void-touched said gently. a survey team mapping the dimensional boundaries. When the war began, you were caught in a reality storm. Your ship was destroyed, your crew scattered across dimensions. You've been trying to gather them back together ever since. My crew, the Devourer's mental voice was filled with sudden hope. I can feel them, scattered across the void. If I could find them, bring them home. ... You can, Kythera said, but not by consuming them, by calling to them, by showing them the way back. We'll help you, Cassian added. And Kythera felt a surge of love for this strange, brilliant man who could offer aid to a creature that had been trying to devour them moments before. How? The Devourer asked. I know only hunger. I have forgotten how to create. Then we'll remember for you, Kythera said. She reached out, not with her consciousness this time, but with her heart. The genetic memory of her ancestor flowed through her. Love between Lyri Voss and her void-touched bondmate, the joy of creation shared, the harmonious balance of order and chaos. Cassian joined his essence to hers, his hybrid nature amplifying and stabilizing the connection. Together, they became a bridge not just between their two species, but between all possible states of being. The effect on the Devourer was immediate. Its chaotic form began to stabilize, patterns of order emerging from the flux. But instead of the rigid crystalline structures of pure void-touched creation, or the wild organic growth of pure chivalry imagination, something new emerged, a form that was both and neither, beautiful in its uniqueness. I remember, the Devourer said, and its voice was no longer filled with pain. I remember who I was, who we all were. Around them, the dimensional space began to change. The darkness that had seemed so oppressive was revealed to be not empty void, but infinite possibility. And scattered throughout that possibility, Kythera could sense other presences, the lost crew members, the other Devourers, all the beings who had been caught between states during the ancient war. I can call to them, the transformed Devourer said. Show them what you've shown me, the choice between hunger and harmony. It won't be easy, Cassian warned. Some of them have been lost for so long they may not remember their original forms. Then we will teach them to remember. The transformed being replied, as you have taught me. The creature that had once been a Devourer began to sing, not with voice, but with the harmonic resonance of its very existence. The song spread outward through the dimensional void, carrying with it the memory of what it meant to choose creation over consumption, harmony over hunger. One by one, other presences began to respond. Distant lights flickered in the darkness, as lost souls heard the call and began to remember their true nature. But even as hope blossomed, Kythera could sense others' darker presences that recoiled from the song, too far gone in their hunger to accept the offered salvation. Some of them won't come, she said sadly. Then we will love them from afar, the transformed Devourer replied, and hope that someday, they too will remember the choice. The dimensional space began to shift again, reality reasserting itself. Kythera felt herself being drawn back into her physical form, the laboratory of the Prometheus materializing around them. But everything had changed. The ship was no longer alone in space. Dozens of vessels surrounded them, each one unique, each one a testament to the harmony between order and chaos. The fleet, Cassian breathed, staring at the display screens. They're not Devourers anymore. They're what they were always meant to be, the void-touched said, its form more solid now, more present. Explorers, creators, bridges between worlds. Through the viewports, Kythera could see the transformed beings working together, their ships weaving patterns of light through space that spoke of joy and purpose, rediscovered. In the distance, more lights were appearing as other lost souls heard the call and chose harmony over hunger. But not all the lights were friendly. On the edge of sensor range, she could detect the approach of something else, ships that still pulsed with the dark hunger of unconverted Devourers. The others, she said, the ones who refused the call. They're coming. Of course they are, Cassian replied. But he didn't sound worried. They're still hungry, and we've just lit up like a beacon. Can we fight them? We don't need to fight them, the void touched said. We need to love them. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. The converted devourers. Kythera found herself thinking of them as the redeemed worked with the crew of the Prometheus to prepare for what was to come. Not a battle, but an intervention on a cosmic scale. As the hostile fleet approached, Kythera stood with Cassian in the ship's main observatory, watching the stars wheel overhead. The money that had originally brought her here seemed like a distant memory now, irrelevant compared to the magnitude of what they were attempting. Do you regret it? Cassian asked quietly. Coming here, getting caught up in all this. She considered the question seriously. 3 weeks ago, she had been a scavenger on the edge of civilized space, concerned only with her own survival. Now she was married to a human hybrid and helping to save creatures that existed between dimensions. It should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like coming home. No, she said finally. I don't regret it. Do you? Regret marrying you for money and ending up saving the galaxy? Not hardly. We haven't saved it yet. No, he agreed, slipping his hand into hers. But we will, together. The hostile devourers arrived like a plague of darkness, their ships creating wounds in space wherever they passed. But the redeemed were ready for them. As the dark fleet approached, the converted beings began to sing again, not the individual song that had called to their scattered companions, but a harmony that encompassed all of them. A symphony of redemption that echoed across dimensions. Now, the void touched said. Kythera and Cassian joined their voices to the song, their hybrid connection amplifying and focusing the harmonic resonance. Around them, the crew of the Prometheus added their own voices, human, yes, but touched by something greater now, elevated by their proximity to beings who had chosen love over hunger. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The approaching devourer fleet slowed, then stopped, their dark ships flickering as the song reached them. For a moment Kythera thought they would succeed completely, that all the lost souls would remember their true nature. Then the darkness struck back. The countersong that erupted from the hostile devourers was like nothing Kythera had ever experienced. Pure negation given voice, a sound that sought to unmake not just music, but the very concept of harmony itself. Several of the redeemed cried out in pain as the sonic assault hit them, their newly stabilized forms wavering under the onslaught. They're trying to force us back into hunger, one of the converted beings communicated through the dimensional link. They want us to remember only the pain. Hold fast, Cassian replied, his hybrid nature allowing him to channel strength to the struggling redeemed. Remember what you chose. Remember why you chose it. But even as he spoke, Kythera could feel the dark song taking its toll. The harmony they had built was fracturing, individual voices falling silent as the devourer's negation wore away at their resolve. Worse, she could sense something else in the attack, a desperate loneliness that made her heart ache. They're not just trying to convert us back, she realized. They're trying to make us understand. They're showing us what it's like to be the only ones left, the only ones who remember the hunger. The revelation changed everything. The dark song wasn't an attack, it was a plea. The unconverted devourers weren't monsters reveling in destruction. They were the last holdouts of a tragedy that had consumed them for 3 millennia, and they were terrified of being alone. Stop fighting them, Kythera called out to the redeemed. Stop trying to overpower their song. But they're destroying our harmony. No, they're trying to join it. They just don't know how anymore. She reached out through the dimensional link. Not with the harmonious song of redemption, but with something simpler and more fundamental, the acknowledgement of pain. Instead of trying to drown out the devourer's negation, she embraced it, accepted it, and slowly began to weave it into the greater symphony. The effect was immediate. The hostile song faltered, not because it was being overpowered, but because it was being heard. For the first time in 3,000 years, the lost devourers felt truly understood. You know, one of them communicated, its mental voice filled with wonder. You know what it is to be alone. Yes, Kithara replied. I know what it is to be lost between worlds, to feel like you don't belong anywhere. But I also know what it is to find someone who sees you as you truly are. She felt presence beside her in the link, steady and warm. Around them, the other redeemed began to understand what she was doing, and one by one, they stopped fighting the dark song and began to harmonize with it instead. The result was unlike anything that had existed before a musical composition. That encompassed the full spectrum of existence, from the highest peaks of joy to the deepest valleys of despair, and found beauty in all of it. We remember, the hostile devourers said in unison, their individual voices joining the greater symphony. We choose to remember. The transformation was visible even in normal space. The dark ships began to change, their wound-like passages through reality healing, as their occupants chose creation over consumption. But these newly redeemed were different from the first group where the others had found balance between order and chaos. These beings carried within them the memory of ultimate loss, and their new forms reflected that depth of experience. The symphony is complete, the voice said, its ancient voice filled with satisfaction. All the lost children have come home. But even as they celebrated, Kithara felt a disturbance in the dimensional matrix. Something was approaching from the deep voids, something vast and powerful, and utterly alien. What is that? Cassian asked. Following her gaze to the sensor displays, the answer came not from their instruments, but from the redeemed themselves. As one, every converted devourer turned toward the approaching presence, their forms shifting into defensive configurations. The Void Shepherd, they communicated. The one who guided us into hunger when we first became lost. It comes to reclaim us. The entity that emerged from folded space defied description. It was impossibly large, easily the size of a small moon, and its form seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, where the devourers had been creatures of hunger. This thing was hunger itself, the void made manifest and given purpose. My children, it spoke, and its voice carried the weight of eons. You have forgotten your purpose. You have allowed these lesser beings to corrupt you with their weakness. They haven't been corrupted, Kithara said, stepping forward, even though every instinct screamed at her to flee. They've been healed. Healed. The Void Shepherd's attention focused on her, and she felt as though she were being examined by something vast and incomprehensible. You know nothing of what they have suffered. What we have all suffered. The universe is pain, child. The only mercy is to end it. The universe is possibility, Cassian replied, moving to stand beside his wife. Pain is part of it, yes. But so is joy. So is love. So is the choice to create rather than destroy. Love. The word seemed to cause the Void Shepherd physical pain. I remember love. I remember what it cost us. What it cost everything. Images flooded through the dimensional link, memories of the original war between the Void-Touched and the Shivari, but seen from a different perspective. The Void Shepherd had been there, watching as two species that loved each other tore themselves apart, trying to become something they were not. I shepherded the lost ones into hunger, because hunger, at least, is honest, it continued. Hunger does not pretend to be noble. It does not dress destruction in the language of creation. It simply consumes, and in consuming, it ends suffering. But it doesn't end suffering, Kithara said, understanding finally flooding through her. It spreads it. Every world consumed, every being devoured, their pain doesn't disappear. It becomes part of the hunger. Better that than the alternative. Better honest destruction than the lie of love. It's not a lie, Cassian said quietly. Love isn't about becoming perfect. It's about choosing to stay together despite imperfection. It's about finding harmony without losing yourself. He reached out and took Kithara's hand, their fingers intertwining. The simple gesture sent ripples through the dimensional matrix, and suddenly the Void Shepherd could see what they had built together. Not the desperate fusion that had destroyed their ancestors, but a partnership that celebrated difference, while creating unity. "This is not possible," the Void Shepherd said, but its voice carried less certainty now. "Love always leads to the hunger, always leads to the void. Only if you try to consume the one you love," Kithara replied. "Only if you try to make them into a copy of yourself, instead of celebrating what makes them unique." Around them, the redeemed began to add their voices to the conversation, sharing their own newly recovered memories of what love could be when it wasn't twisted by the need to possess or control. "The hybrid child," the Void Shepherd said, its attention focusing on Cassian. "You are the offspring of that ancient love. You should have been impossible." "I was," Cassian agreed. "But my parents chose to love each other anyway, and their descendants chose the same thing, generation after generation, until finally their love created something that could bridge the gap between your pain and their hope. And you?" The Void Shepherd turned to Kithara. "You carried the genetic memory of that first love. Do you not see how it ended? Do you not fear to repeat their mistakes?" "I see how it ended," Kithara said. "But I also see how it began, and I see how it could continue, if we're brave enough to learn from their mistakes, instead of being paralyzed by them." The Void Shepherd was silent for a long moment, its vast form shifting and changing as it processed what they were telling. When it spoke again, its voice was softer, carrying within it the first hint of something other than despair. "You would offer me redemption as well, after all the suffering I have caused?" "We would offer you a choice," Cassian said. "The same choice we offered the Devouris, the same choice our ancestors had, but were too afraid to make properly. You can continue to shepherd beings into the void, or you can help them find their way back to the light. And if I choose wrongly again, if I lead others into new forms of suffering, then we'll be here to help you choose again." Kithara said simply, "That's what love is, not perfection, but persistence. Not avoiding mistakes, but learning from them." Together, the transformation of the Void Shepherd was nothing like the conversion of the where they had changed suddenly, dramatically. This ancient being shifted slowly, carefully, as if testing each new configuration before committing to it. Its form remained vast, but the darkness that had surrounded it began to brighten, becoming not empty void but infinite space, filled with stars, yet to be born. "I choose," it said finally, and its voice now carried harmonics of hope. "I choose to shepherd souls toward creation rather than consumption. I choose to remember that even the deepest void can be filled with light, if one is patient enough to kindle it." The moment the Void Shepherd made its choice, something fundamental shifted in the fabric of space itself. Across the galaxy, other lost beings, creatures that had been caught between states, trapped in hunger or despairs, suddenly felt the call of a new song. Not the desperate harmony of the redeemed, but something deeper and more sustaining. The simple recognition that they were not alone, that someone understood their pain and was willing to help them transform it into something beautiful. "It's done," Kithara said, feeling the change resonate through her genetic memory. "The cycle is broken." "Not broken," Cassian corrected, pulling her close. "Completed, the way it should have been completed 3,000 years ago." They stood together in the observatory of the Prometheus, watching as the transformed fleet began to disperse across the galaxy. Some of the redeemed would return to their old roles as explorers and scientists. Others would take on new purposes: teachers, healers, guides for other lost souls. The Void Shepherd itself had already begun to move toward the galactic core, where its song could reach the greatest number of suffering beings. "So," Kithara said after a while, "what happens now? I mean, we saved the galaxy, ended a 3,000-year cycle of pain, and redeemed creatures from beyond the void. What does one do for an encore?" Cassian laughed, the sound bright and warm in the observatory's quiet. I was thinking we could try something really ambitious. Such as a normal marriage. You know, the kind where we actually get to know each other outside of cosmic crises. Scandalous, Kithara said, but she was smiling. Think we can manage? I don't know. We've never tried just being ourselves without the fate of the universe hanging in the balance. Well, she said, leaning into his embrace, we did agree on for better or worse in those vows. That we did, Mrs. Kane. That we did, Mr. Kane. Outside the viewport, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, but now those patterns carried new meaning. Somewhere among them, the redeemed were building new worlds. The Void Shepherd was singing lost souls back to wholeness, and two species that had once torn each other apart were learning to love again, and aboard the Prometheus, a Chevry woman, who had once sold her marriage for money, discovered that some things were worth far more than any price she could have imagined. Love, it turned out, was not just about the choice to stay together. It was about the daily decision to build something beautiful from the raw materials of two different lives. She had said yes for the money, but she stayed for the love, and in staying, she had helped heal a galaxy. The end.